Hello! Today we're going to be looking at lesson 4.1, which is samples and surveys, the mini lesson. We're going to start by actually just conducting a fictitious survey. So the first thing we'll do is just the question. So what is your favorite type of movie? And then we're going to pretend that we do a class-wide vote and see the results that we get back. So we'll start with my personal favorite, comedy. So if, let's say in a class of 24 students, we have 12 students who vote for comedy. Then mystery, we have 3 people who vote for mystery. For drama, we have 2. And then we have a bunch of people who like that sappy romance. So we're going to say that we have 7 votes for romance. And so, of course, that gives us a grand total of 24 total people. The main thing that's important, however, is understanding how to interpret the results of a survey and how a survey can actually be used. See, your opinion is very important to lots of people, especially businesses and companies who are trying to understand their consumers. So surveys are done to get a smaller group of people's opinion in order to attempt to reflect the entire population, the entire group's opinion, because finding the actual opinion of the entire group is very challenging. So some surveys are conducted in a very scientific way and done so that the group accurately represents everybody. Others are not done so well, and that's why as a person that's knowledgeable and someone that's going to be a reader, you want to be able to evaluate if, in fact, it was a survey that was done well or not so well. So let's start just by going through some of these definitions. So first of all, population. The population is the entire group that's being studied. So that would be whoever you're trying to represent. Sometimes the population is a very, very large group. Sometimes it's not. So that would be the entire group being studied. The sample, this is a very specific thing. The sample very specifically is who is actually being surveyed, who was asked the question. So the sample is going to be the part of the population who was actually surveyed. And a biased sample will exist when you have a situation where a survey is conducted and the group that was asked does not accurately represent the population. They're not represented well for whatever reason. So in this particular example, if we were asked, asking what is your favorite movie, and maybe I said, I'm trying to figure out what 7th graders in Fort Couch prefer. We asked the survey only in one homeroom, and these are the results. So basically, in that case, if we were defining the population, it'd be who I was attempting to represent. And I just got done saying that would be Fort Couch 7th graders. And the sample is very specifically who was asked. And so this was one homeroom. And so is there any potential bias? And sometimes there is and sometimes there isn't. I really wouldn't say there's a huge bias here. However, I do think it's important to note that we are only asking one homeroom, which is a fairly small sample. So sometimes you might list small sample if you think that you're not including enough people to represent the whole group. And so that's what we'll note here. I will make mention to the fact that sometimes the bias isn't extremely clear. Sometimes you have to kind of think through it and explain it, and other times it'll be fairly obvious. So let's try example 1. So in example 1, we are asked to identify the population, the sample, and any possible biases in these surveys. So A, it says, a company is doing a survey to assess employee satisfaction. So are they happy with where they work and how they're compensated and all of those things. So it says the marketing manager surveys his team of employees about how they like working at the company. Okay, so the population here. The population is the entire company, right? All of the employees at the company. So for population, we're going to define it as company employees. The sample, remember that's specifically who is asked, in this case was only the marketing employees. So remember, a bias exists when the sample doesn't accurately represent the population. So it doesn't mean everyone has to be included. Remember, the point of a survey is not to ask everybody. It's to ask a smaller group in order to represent the entire group. In this case, they chose the marketing employees. The problem is because the sample is only including one section of the company, we might not get an accurate picture. For example, maybe the marketing employees all really, really like their particular boss and they like what they're doing, and so they have a very positive view. Or the opposite could be true. Maybe they don't like their manager, or they don't feel that marketing is given enough attention, and so they're actually dissatisfied. The point is, because we're only asking that one group, their opinion may differ from the other groups within the company. So I'm going to list the possible bias as only one department is asked. And then I just want to make a note about how the survey was conducted. Who asked the survey question? Notice who it was. The marketing manager. Your answer might change because your boss is the one that's asking you. So I also think that there could be a bias here. People might feel they need to respond positively because of who's asking them. So there's actually a bias that could exist based on how the survey was conducted. So we'll say conducted by their manager. So you really kind of have to think about what might be causing a bias in the particular survey. Okay, the next one says, Team 2 is trying to determine where to go for their spring field trip. Mrs. Nancy decides to survey the 7 girls during AT about where they would like to go. Okay, so when identifying the population, it's helpful for you to actually think about who is all affected or impacted by this question. So in this case, if it's the Team 2 field trip, the population that's impacted is all Team 2 students. So I'm going to list that as our population. Now remember, the sample is very specific. It's only who was asked. And in this case, that was the 7 girls that she had during AT one day. So 7 girls. So bias. So who are we excluding? First of all, again, it's a fairly small sample. So we may want to note that it's a small sample if it's only that group of girls. But more importantly, no boys were included. And they may, not necessarily, but they may have a different opinion about where they'd like to go for their field trip. So it's just important that we include members of the entire group that may have a different opinion. Doesn't mean every person in the group, but a good sampling of everybody. Okay, so next, we're going to look at some different types of surveys. And you can see 3 different sampling methods up here. The first one is random, and it sounds just like you would expect it is. It's just by chance. So you could do a random survey where you just randomly ask people. There's no rhyme or reason. Or if you want it to be truly random, you could have names in a hat where you pull them, or on a spinner where you spin it and get their names from there. Systematic, on the other hand, is if you have a set rule or formula that you're going to follow. This could be as simple as I'm going to ask everybody in the cafeteria who has a red shirt on, or I'm going to ask everybody in my class that has dark hair. Or even it could be by last name. It could be anything where there's a system in place. Stratified, on the other hand, is when you have two separate tiers of random sampling. So if you want to write that down, two tiers. So first, you might take a really large group and break them into a smaller subgroup. And then beyond that, you're going to randomly choose people within the subgroups. So let's read these and see if we can determine what one each one is. Okay, so in a statewide survey, 3 counties are selected, and then residents from 5 neighborhoods from each county are asked. So there's a statewide survey. We can first see that it's broken up into subgroups, the 3 counties, and then specifically the residents of 5 neighborhoods. So, and we assume that that's a random selection of residents. So if that's the case, this is 2 groups of random samplings, which would make it stratified. Next, John randomly selects people in the cafeteria to complete his science fair survey question. Yep, it says it right in the problem. Just random selection, and that's the survey type. And then lastly, to determine how moviegoers feel about the latest movie release, a newspaper reporter decides to ask each person leaving the movie that has dark hair how they liked it. And I mentioned that as an example unintentionally, but that would be systematic. They had a set system in place for who they were going to ask about their opinion. And that's it.